They were the mind hunters, the elite profilers of the FBI who could walk into a crime scene and see the ghost of the killer. They built a legend on an almost supernatural ability to solve the unsolvable. They gave us categories and archetypes: the organized, the disorganized, a whole grammar for understanding madness. The media celebrated them, Hollywood immortalized them, and for decades, their word was gospel. But what if the legend was a lie? This is Raymond Lee Jennings. He spent 11 years in prison for a murder he didn't commit, all because he fit a profile. His case, and so many others like it, would expose a shocking truth. The FBI's most trusted methods weren't just flawed, they were a blueprint for injustice. Innocent people were being sent to prison, while the real killers walked free. This is the story of the cases that shattered the myth of the FBI profiler. To see how it all went so wrong, we have to go back to February 21, 2000. In a desolate park-and-ride lot in Palmdale, California, an 18-year-old college student named Michelle O'Keefe was found dead in her car. She'd been shot 4 times. The case was baffling. There was no murder weapon, no fingerprints, and the male DNA found under her fingernails didn't match anyone in the system. The lead detectives were stumped. They had one person of interest: Raymond Jennings, a 25-year-old Iraq War veteran working as a security guard patrolling the lot that night. He was the one who called in, reporting gunshots, and then finding the body. But detectives thought his story was suspicious, that he was lying about what he saw. Still, they had absolutely nothing tying him to the crime. This is where the profiler came in. The prosecution brought in Mark Safarik, a retired FBI profiler and a star in his field who even headlined a TV show called Killer Instinct. Safarik analyzed the crime scene and spun a narrative. He noted the driver's side window was slightly lowered and theorized that Michelle had spoken to someone who seemed trustworthy, like a security guard. He saw her tube top was askew and declared the motive wasn't robbery, but a botched sexual assault that escalated into a panicked murder. His theory painted a perfect, if imaginary, picture of Raymond Jennings as the killer. It explained away the complete lack of physical evidence by creating a psychological motive that, supposedly, only a profiler could see. At trial, the prosecution's case was thin, but Safarik's testimony was the main event. An appeals court later wrote that without his testimony, there was no evidence from which the jury might infer the motive. The profile was the case, and it was enough. Raymond Jennings was sentenced to life in prison. He'd been convicted by a story, but for years, Jennings maintained his innocence from behind bars. His lawyers argued that the profile was pure speculation sold to the jury as science, creating a tunnel vision that made investigators ignore other leads. Then, the twist came. A new investigation uncovered evidence that authorities now believe points to Michelle O'Keefe being killed by local gang members in a robbery. Faced with this, Mark Safarik, the FBI profiler, formally withdrew his testimony. After 11 years, Raymond Jennings was declared factually innocent and set free. The scary part? The Raymond Jennings case wasn't just a one-off failure. It was a symptom of a much larger problem. While profiling was sending people to prison based on stories, another, supposedly harder science from the FBI was doing the same thing, but on an industrial scale. For over 2 decades, one of the most powerful tools in the FBI's forensic arsenal was microscopic hair analysis. In courtrooms across America, FBI examiners would claim that a hair found at a crime scene was a match to a defendant. They'd use scientific-sounding jargon, dazzling juries into believing they could link a single strand of hair to one person on Earth. and one person only. There was just one problem. The science was bogus. There is no accepted research that can prove a hair came from a specific person just by looking at it under a microscope. Yet for decades, the FBI presented this technique as a near certainty. In 2012, the Department of Justice and the Innocence Project began a massive review of cases where FBI hair analysis was used. The results were horrifying. They found that in over 95% of the cases reviewed, FBI examiners gave flawed testimony that wildly exaggerated the science to favor prosecutors. Let that sink in. Of 268 trials looked at in the initial review, 257 included scientifically invalid testimony from the nation's top law enforcement agency. The review identified nearly 30 cases where this junk science was used in court. These weren't minor mistakes. They were foundational errors in trials for murder and rape. The human cost was devastating. The review found that at least 35 defendants in these cases had been sentenced to death. 9 of them had already been executed. Men like Cleveland Wright spent 28 years in prison for a murder he didn't commit, convicted on the word of an FBI hair analyst before being exonerated. The FBI's training was so influential that hundreds of state-level examiners were also taught these same flawed methods, creating what one expert called a mass disaster for the justice system. It was a dirty bomb of pseudoscience that the FBI had unleashed on American courts for decades. The Raymond Jennings case and the hair analysis scandal pulled back the curtain on a dangerous truth. The problem wasn't just one flawed technique or one biased profiler. The problem was the myth of infallibility itself. For years, profiling and other forensic techniques were presented not as investigative tools, but as objective science. They gave prosecutors a story to tell a jury, a story of a mind hunter unmasking a killer or a lab tech finding a perfect match. But profiling isn't a science. It's an art based on inference, generalization, and far too often the profiler's own biases. Its history is littered with famous failures. The profile of the Boston Strangler suggested he was a recluse. The man who confessed to the crimes, Albert DeSalvo, lived with his family. In the UK, the hunt for Rachel Nichols' killer became a textbook example of how a bad profile can lead to disastrous tunnel vision, as police stalked an innocent man for years, while the real killer went on to murder again. Today, the role of profiling is being re-evaluated. It's understood to be one tool among many, something that can offer suggestions, but should never be used as direct evidence of guilt. The danger is believing in the legend, in seeing profilers as superhuman figures who can magically solve a crime. Justice requires more than a good story. It requires hard, verifiable evidence. The cases that broke the FBI's profiles weren't just investigative failures, they were human tragedies. They remind us that behind every flawed analysis is a human cost. Years stolen from an innocent person, and a real killer left free to harm again. The pursuit of justice has to be a search for truth, not a hunt for a character who simply fits the part. Thanks for watching. If you found this investigation insightful, please consider subscribing for more deep dives into complex cases. Let us know in the comments what you think about the role of profiling in criminal investigations.